achievers, goal-getters, and relentless visionaries who are hell-bent on success without burnout stealing your spark. Welcome to the one place where freedom and fulfillment aren't optional. They're the standard. Here, we know that balance, it's bullshit. We are all about burnout-proof systems that don't suck, bold goals backed by smarter hustle, and unapologetically building a life where you're doing what you love and loving how you do it. I'm Ellen Schicke. Welcome to the Burnout-Proof podcast. Hey Achievers, and welcome to the final episode of 2024. And let's just first and foremost stop and say, what a year. Whether you coasted, climbed, or crawled through 2024, you made it. You survived. And I think that is something in and of itself that is worth celebrating as we wrap this year up. I contemplated this year not even recording an episode this week, taking the week off, giving us all a little bit of a respite and a little bit of a break. But I had kind of one final thing I wanted to talk about to end 2024 and to bring us into 2025. And that is some really important final lessons that I learned about burnout and about myself over the course of this year. So with that, grab a coffee and take a deep breath, and let's dive into what 2024 taught me about freedom, growth, and the never-ending evolution that is being a high achiever. Now, I've got a little bit of a cheat sheet I'm operating off of today, but our first lesson is all about, we're just gonna call it new level, new devil, and kind of what I learned about freedom and discipline and how when it comes to high achievement and high performance, there is a happy balance and a coexistence of those two things that we need to experience and that we need to think about. Let me tell you what I mean when I say that. So the first half of this year was, needless to say, kind of messy for me. To put it back into context for you, I went full-time in my business earlier this year. I, for the first time, dropped down to part-time in my day job, and I went full-time in my business. And here I am thinking that that was just gonna mean, I was gonna have so much more time. It was gonna be so much easier for me to step into the routines and structure that I wanted for years to create in my business. And if anything, it was the complete opposite of that. I think I had spent so many years being overscheduled and overcommitted, building this business on the side and, working another job, that when I finally had the freedom, the time in my schedule, I bucked against it left, right, and center. I bucked against it in every way you possibly could. And it took me about 6 months to realize why that was. Like, I am typically a person who very naturally falls into routines. I kind of like structure. I actually saw something on Instagram the other day that cracked me up. It was like, I like routines until I get bored. And then I like, not having a routine until I get overwhelmed. And then I like routines again. I'm maybe a little bit like that. And maybe you are too. But with this, I think what I started to realize, and again, it took me about 6 months to really realize this, is that I had been running pedal to the metal, running myself ragged, running on empty perhaps for so long that the very idea of schedules and routines and locking myself into some sort of new structure felt suffocating. If anything, it was the last thing that I wanted. And so as much as I tried to force myself into these routines, they never stuck, they never clicked, and I just never felt like I found my rhythm. For the first 6 months of the year, I got the things done that I needed to get done, but I didn't really feel very good about it. And come June, July, very much early summer, I kind of just started giving myself permission to be in this phase, giving myself permission to not have that structure instead of bucking against it and rebelling against it. It's funny, I was rebelling against structure, but also simultaneously really frustrated and angry at myself and rebelling against the fact that I didn't want structure. It was a really, really interesting dance that I did for the first 6 months of the year. And I finally gave myself essentially like this radical permission. And I kind of started to realize that it wasn't me failing. It wasn't a sign of failure for me that I was struggling to be structured when I should, quote unquote, should be structured. And I realized it wasn't a failure. It was more of a recalibration. I really had to, and I think that's what kind of happened at the beginning of the summer for me this year. I had to ride out this feeling. I had to ride out this discomfort of unstructured freedom to get to a place where I could kind of find the happy medium, where I could find that happy balance again, where I felt good about structure. It felt like structure was supporting me as opposed to limiting me or controlling me. I think a lot of times with our self-care routines and the very routines that we create for ourselves, Sometimes the issue is that those routines start to feel like cages. And that's kind of how I felt earlier this year. The routines felt like cages until I got to the point where I realized, no, these don't have to feel like cages. Until I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to force this anymore. I'm not going to make myself fit into this mold that isn't working and that I don't like and that I'm bucking against. I am going to ride this out until I get to the point where it feels good to have that structure again. I feel like I was completely unscheduled one week and then, hyper scheduled the next. And it really wasn't until I gave myself that permission, that radical acceptance of, okay, this is where I'm at. This is what actually feels good right now, that I feel like I actually finally started to find that rhythm. And it was a rhythm that simultaneously felt sustainable. Sustainable is my word for balanced. I don't like the notion of balance and work-life balance. Sustainable is really my word for balance. That is what I feel like I got to. I got to a point where I feel like I found a sustainable way to approach schedule and structure. And in doing so, I found this happy balance between freedom and focus. So if you've been finding that, or if you've been in a season in the past, I think that is a learning moment for us to say, hey, firstly, it takes tremendous self-awareness to be able to realize that you are in a season where you're bucking against the things that you normally don't, where you are not able to fall into the routines and patterns that perhaps in the past came so naturally to you, or vice versa. It takes tremendous self-awareness to know that. And that self-awareness, just like everything else we talk about, is a muscle that we have to build. It's not something that just happens to most of us. So we have to have that self-awareness, but we also have to have the compassion, the perspective, whatever word you want to assign to it, to be willing to say, okay, I'm in a different place right now. I need to give myself permission to be in this different place right now, because I think if we shame ourselves, if we try to force ourselves to be, the old version of us or a new version of us that we're not ready yet, it's just not going to happen. I think that's really what this taught me, is that forcing it isn't going to work. You have to meet yourself where you're at, in the same way you might meet a client where they're at, or in the same way you might meet your kid where you're at. You have to give that to yourself as well and meet yourself where you're at. And that's really what the beginning of this year taught me. So ultimately, I think the takeaway from this is, if you are in a season where routines feel like shackles, first and foremost, you're not alone, because that's how I felt very much earlier this year. And if you are in that season, I think the takeaway is give yourself grace. Let your schedule breathe. Find what actually does work for you instead of what you feel like, quote unquote, should work for you, okay? Because this is what made me realize that discipline and freedom aren't enemies. They aren't opposites in the way I previously thought they might be. They're partners. They coexist. They play off of each other with high achievers. And we just need to find that balance of where we're at and what season of life we're in, so that we know what's going to serve us. So that was really my first big lesson of 2024 that I wanted to share with you today. All right, so with that, let's move into lesson number 2. And again, I got my handy dandy little iPad here that I'm reading off of for those of you who are watching the video, okay? So lesson number 2, I called shiny objects and missed opportunities. But really what this was very much about is why systems are the foundation of growth. And this is a real talk moment that I get to have with you all now. And some of you who are listening to this might very well be people who are going to know exactly what I'm talking about when I tell this story. You're going to know exactly what I'm referring to without me even necessarily naming it. Because here's the hard truth that I learned this year. Investing in growth, whether it's growth for you, growth for your business, whatever, it only actually works if you have the capacity to implement it. This is an aha that I had this year. I learned this the hard way by working with a coach this year who is literally at the top of her game. She is brilliant. She's a genius. She is so good at what she does. But in reality, and this is the gut check moment and the real talk moment I had to have, and I really realized in probably November, so it hasn't been too long since I realized this, I realized I couldn't fully show up for what she was teaching me because I hadn't laid the groundwork for myself, mentally or practically. Let me tell you a little bit of what I mean with this. So when I started working with her, she gave me all of these things I should do. She gave me all of these frameworks to operate off of. Do this when you're posting on social media. Do this when you're conversing with people on Instagram. And in those early months, I almost feel like I was showing up to the calls. I was doing all of the things that I was supposed to do. And yet the implementation that was happening outside of it Well, for lack of a better way to say it, it wasn't. There was not implementation happening outside of it. I was just listening and not doing anything. And the reason for that is because, frankly, I felt overwhelmed. Granted, when I started working with her, I was in this season that I mentioned in the previous point, where I was in this season where I didn't have structure. I was really struggling with structure. I was really bucking against structure. And to implement what she needed for me to implement to get the most out of the work I was doing with her, I needed a structure that I didn't have. I needed a discipline that I didn't have. And yet, this is, I think, what a lot of us as business owners do. We throw money at the problem. We hire that coach. We hire that copywriter. We hire that person to work on our website. And I'm not saying those things aren't things that are going to benefit us. I'm not saying those things aren't things that we need. But I think there's an order to which we do things that I didn't have when I started working with this coach. And this is really the aha that I've started to realize. There are tremendous business coaches out there, whether they specialize in sales or systems or whatever they might specialize in. There's tremendous coaches out there for those of us who are business owners, those of us who are just need like a life coach or somebody to help support us through our own personal goals. There's tremendous support out there. And yet, if you think just working with that person is going to somehow fix the issue, we've got to ask ourselves, do I actually have the capacity to implement? Am I in a place in my life where I'm going to benefit from what they're telling me? Or am I going to pay a shit ton of money just to sit in calls and not actually do anything with the information I'm learning? That's the gut check moment I've had. And this is a very real talk moment that I'm having with myself, and a gut check moment I had to have with myself in creating this podcast and in a couple months ago when I had this aha. When I started working with this person, I was distracted by shiny objects. I was skipping over core routines and core self-care. I was chasing quick wins instead of focusing on what actually was going to benefit me and was actually going to support sustainable growth in my business. I couldn't fully show up for what she was teaching me because I hadn't laid the groundwork for myself. And so what I really had to start doing is once I got over that kind of hump of bucking against routine and finding a happy balance between structure and freedom, that is really when things started to click for me. I had to lay core routines for myself. I had to lay core systems for myself. I had to really get to a mental, emotional place where I was receptive to changing how I operated. So all of those components had to come together. I've talked before about how I think sustainable success is all about systems, self-care, and mindset. And in some respects, I've gotten away from my routines, but also in some respects, like I mentioned on the last one, new level, new devil. Whenever we level up in our life or in our business, there's shifts that have to happen to those systems, to that self-care, to that mindset. And I don't think I'd made those shifts quite yet. I think I expected to go full time and to just be able to have it all happen magically around me. And fact of the matter was, that's just not how it happened. So I skipped over doing that fundamental work for myself and just expected to almost like learn through osmosis, which is a nerdy thing to say, but whatever. Y'all know I'm a nerd. So with that, I want to emphasize that I've worked with several people this year, and this isn't about blaming any of them. That's not about blaming the coach or the program or the system, because frankly, everybody that I've worked with this year, with the exception of perhaps one person, they are at the top of their game. I know they know what they're doing. I know it wasn't a them thing. I think it was a me thing. So it's not about shaming or blaming them. It is very much about recognizing that before you look at external solutions, and again, I'm talking to myself and saying this and reminding myself of this when I say this, instead of looking for external solutions, we need to ensure that our internal systems are solid. And I think that's something that a lot of us skip over. For me, that meant going back to the basics, my self-care, my routines, my framework for sustainable success, and really asking myself, do I have this in place? So I think the question and thing I want you to take from this is, before you hire the coach, before you buy the course, before you chase the next big thing, you throw money at the next big thing that you very well might need in your life and business. I'm not saying that you don't. What I want you to ask yourself is, do I have the capacity? Do I have the capacity to implement the things that I'm going to learn? If the answer is no, pause. If the answer is no, you've got to focus on shoring up your foundations first, your systems, your self-care, your mindset, or else you're going to be throwing money at a problem and you're going to basically be flushing that money down the toilet. for the lack of a better way to say it. We have to be in a place where we have the capacity and the foundations to receive the information we're being taught, or it's a waste. And I think that's really what this taught me, is we've got to focus on foundations. Growth isn't just about new strategies. Let me say that again. Growth isn't just about new strategies. It is about creating the systems and support that you need to execute them. And I think that's something that I skipped a little bit this year. Now, last but not least, we've got another new level, new devil kind of lesson for you. And this one is settling isn't in a high achiever's DNA. This year, I kept catching myself thinking something along the lines of, when will things finally feel settled? When will I finally get there? When will I finally arrive at a place where things calm down? Have you ever had that thought pop up in your head? Have you ever wondered to yourself, when the hell is my life just gonna chill out? Because I did. I did a lot, especially in the latter half of this year. And this is the thing that I realized recently. High achievers like us, we're not wired to feel settled. Now, granted, can we change our ways and rewire ourselves? Absolutely. But I also just don't think it's in our DNA. I think we're idea machines. Even when things are good, even when things are great, we're dreaming up the next goal, the next project, the next level for us to hit. That is just how we are wired. And I don't think anymore that that's a bad thing. I think sometimes I bucked against it and I thought, why am I like this? Why do I do this to myself? Well, I do this to myself because I love how it makes me feel. I love how fulfilling it feels. I want to, for some people, they say you gotta, milk this life for all it's worth. That's part of how a high achiever does that. They milk this life for all it's worth by doing all of the things they've ever thought of or wondered about or wanted to make happen but weren't sure they could. That's how they milk this life for all it's worth, is by chasing the next big project, the next big idea, the next level. When we realize we're never settled and enough never feels like enough, it kind of can feel like the constant striving is a flaw. Like maybe we weren't grateful enough or content enough in our life circumstances. But I don't think it's about dissatisfaction. I don't think that's the truth of the matter anymore. I think for high achiever, it's about evolution. High achievers don't settle because we're creators. We're wired to build, to innovate, and to grow. And that's what I've realized this year. My business, in so many respects, I got rid of offers this year. I am removing things from my offer suite that have been a part of my business for years. And, you'll hear entrepreneurs say, I burned my entire business down to build it back up again. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are high achievers and high performers. And I think sometimes we're just like, we get frustrated with ourselves. Why is enough never enough? Why am I never settled? Why am I never content? And it's because of this, because we are fundamentally creators. And that evolution is a part of how we feel fulfilled in our lives. And I'm starting to realize and embrace that about myself. And of course, this does not mean you should never rest, doesn't mean you should never celebrate wins. But what it does mean is embracing this sort of new level, new devil mindset. It's about realizing that every time you level up, new challenges are going to appear. That's a fact. It's gonna happen no matter what. Like, I will never forget telling the story of I burned myself out when I started really leaning into speaking and taking a lot of speaking engagements. I took too many speaking engagements in too short of a period of time because, frankly, the fact of the matter was I didn't know. I didn't know what was too much. New level, new devil. Every time you would change or adapt or something new gets introduced into your life, I'm starting to date again. If I get into a relationship, that's almost going to be a new level, new devil kind of situation here too, because I'm going to have to figure out how to find a happy balance with a new relationship and the things that I have on my plate. That's also a new level, new devil. And when we realize that that new level, that new thing that we are experiencing is going to come with new challenges, that's not a problem, it's an opportunity. In the same way that I always say stress isn't a problem, stress is actually adaptive. This new level isn't a problem either. These new challenges aren't a problem either. The fact of the matter is, anything 2025 throws at you, you've got this. You can figure it out even if it doesn't feel like you can in the moment. So stop chasing the illusion of settle. Stop thinking that you're ever going to get there, and stop getting mad at yourself if you ever do get frustrated that you never feel settled. Instead, let's just lean into the process, which I know is a really hard thing for an Enneagram 3 to do. Let's just lean into the process. Let's celebrate our growth, honor our ambition. Being a high achiever isn't a flaw. It's a freaking superpower. So let's use it. Let's use the damn superpowers that we have. Because that almost is a full circle moment if we go back to that first lesson that I learned. Because when we use the superpower we have, we're not fighting against it. We're not shooting ourselves. We're not shooting ourselves into settling even. We're embracing who we are, how we operate, and the tremendous skill set that we have in our lives. So with that is my 3 lessons for you. The 3 lessons that 2024 taught me about burnout and about myself. That first and foremost, freedom and discipline aren't enemies. They're partners. Second, growth starts with systems, not shiny objects. And 3, that high achievers aren't meant to feel settled. We're wired to evolve, and that's so okay. So with that, as we close out this year, I want you to reflect on your own journey. Where have you been rebelling against structure, perhaps? And what would a new happy medium look like for you? Second, are your systems strong enough to support the growth you're chasing? And if they're not, what are you going to do to set yourself up for that growth? How can we make sure the money we invest back in our businesses and back into ourselves, that we are actually benefiting from it as best we can, that we are actually creating the capacity to learn and to grow through that investment as best we can? And 3, how can you embrace your constant evolution instead of fighting it? So with that, my friends, let's step into 2025 with clarity, with courage, and with a little bit more grace for ourselves. Can we? Can we do that for ourselves this year? Having a little bit more grace for ourselves. And if this episode resonated, please, please, please share it with a friend who needs this message before 2025, early in 2025. Share it with them. Post it on social media. Take a screenshot and tag me. Again, I'm at Coach Ellen, ELLYN. I would love to hear from you. Let's spread these lessons far and wide, because burnout-proof success is possible for all of us. For you, for that high achiever friend you're thinking of right now, it is possible for all of us, and I want nothing more than that for us in 2025. So with that, stay relentless, achievers, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.